Let's get more on all this with Jaffer. He's the founder and executive director of the National Security Institute. Jamil, always great to have you with us. Thanks for your time this morning. So before we dig into the president's warning about this possible nuclear Armageddon, of course, something we're all over this morning, I do first want to play out some comments made last week by National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan about this very issue. We'll talk after.
We do not presently see indications about the imminent use of nuclear weapons. We are, of course, monitoring that carefully and staying in close consultation with allies and partners. But this is something that we are attuned to, taking very seriously, and communicating directly with Russia about, including the kind of decisive responses the United States would have if they went down that dark road.
So important context there. The White House saying it does not currently see signs that Russia is about to use nuclear weapons. We also just heard from our wonderful correspondent Mike Memley about the fact that the White House was sort of taken by surprise from these comments from President Biden last night in this sort of closed room. With both of those things in mind, what do you make of these comments by the president and how serious this could be?
Well, obviously, the president, Savannah, is deeply concerned that the Russians may use tactical nuclear weapons or chemical or biological weapons, which he also mentioned in the speech last night. And so the question now becomes, what is it the president's hearing? What's the delta between what we heard National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan say there and what message are we communicating to the Russians? Jake Sullivan said we're being very clear about the consequences. The president in the past has said that we'll calibrate our response depending on what Russia does. So, the question is, what are the Russians hearing and what may they do in response? They are under significant pressure. We've seen the losses in Kherson, Kharkiv, other areas, Donetsk. And so, the Ukraine's saying we've got 120 new settlements that we've taken in the last few weeks. So the Russians are under pressure. The question is, are they going to lash out? And is the U.S. effectively deterring any kind of really aggressive move by the Russians, like tactical nuclear weapons or the like?
There's been a lot of talk about Moscow potentially using low-yield tactical nuclear weapons in Ukraine, part of what you're discussing here. If it continues to suffer more battlefield setbacks, so like we've seen recently, is it possible for the U.S. and NATO to respond to something like that in a way that doesn't ultimately lead to nuclear war? Are there steps before that?
Well, one has to hope that there's a response escalation mechanism that doesn't involve us responding with nuclear weapons. But the fact of the matter is that the goal here has got to be to deter that action before it happens, right? What we don't want is Vladimir Putin even thinking that the use of tactical nuclear weapons would be at all acceptable. The president, I think, and Jake Sullivan have got to make clear, and I think in public, Savannah, make clear that any use of nuclear weapons, tactical or otherwise, would result in an overwhelming response, not just from the United States, but from our European allies. Our European allies need to communicate the same message so that Vladimir Putin knows that he's going to be leaving Ukraine, leaving Crimea, and potentially facing a threat at home if, in fact, he goes down this road of any kind of nuclear weapons. That's what it takes to deter it. And sort of the sort of question of we're going to calibrate our responses, what may be creating ambiguity and making the situation more risky, in my view, Savannah.
Absolutely. Now, Jamil, some believe that President Putin sees defeat in Ukraine as a threat to his regime, which he might then equate as a threat to Russia, and therefore justifying the use of nuclear weapons. Of course, this is sort of getting inside his mind, which is not necessarily possible to do. But if you follow that, are there elements within the Russian government or military that are capable of stopping him if he ever reaches that point? I mean, we talk so much about this sort of unchecked power, but what would that look like? Are there people around him who would say, hey, the bigger context of this is not okay?
Well, there's sort of that possibility. We've seen Vladimir Putin concerned about his inner circle. We saw some purges early on in the war of folks at the FSB and the like, and so he has stacked the area around him with loyalists. But on any given day, the Russian elites could respond and say, "Look, you're going too far. This is not working out for us. This is not going the way we wanted." And I think in part he's responding to that by getting more aggressive. And so the question becomes, how can he play this out with his adversaries inside Russia?
Jaffer, as always, thank you so much. We appreciate your time today.